Is the salaried class really affected with budgets every day?
बजट आते जाते रहेंगे और हमारा सबसे बुरा हाल चल रहा है.
So many repercussions, so many programs will have to stop.
My next special will be called non-salaried rich.
So that is how it is.
पागल हो जाऊंगा सर. I am Kumar Varun. I'm an MBA. I'm an engineer. I was a banker. I'm a comedian. I'm a writer. I'm a quizzer. But most importantly, I am confused. I'm confused इस time पे, especially every year. Towards the end of January, the whole country talks about budget. I am ashamed to say, slightly embarrassed, and with due respect to all my finance professors at FMS Delhi, कि आपने बहुत सिखाया मुझे asset liability, balance sheet, P&L, top line, bottom line, appreciation, reverse repo rate. मुझे कुछ नहीं समझ. Every year my friends reach out to me around this time कि यार क्या है बजट यार, क्या होगा क्या इस साल. I make up some stuff and I just, I have to justify my MBA. But I never really understood budget. I'll be very honest. I understand some of the things that they talk about. I understand what is direct tax, indirect tax. I understand regular expenditure, capital expenditure, etc. But how does it really affect my life? मुझे नहीं पता. मुझे हर साल एक दो चीजें पता लग जाती है कि फ्रिज महंगा हो गया है, शायद घर मत खरीदो, उसकी औकात वैसे भी नहीं है तुम्हारी. But I figured out I need a friend. And I have found a friend. I mean, I have friends outside also, but I need a friend who understands budget. And I found a palindrome from KV to VK. Who would have thought? Oh my God, with me is somebody who is not just an author of many books, not just an author. And you might have read Easy Money series, you might have read Bad Money, which is my favorite work of his. But my favorite work of his is actually the articles he writes. I just searched his name on my WhatsApp just before this, and I saw a series of articles that I have shared in all my MBA groups to seem smart. With me right now is Vivek Kaul. Vivek, you know the purpose. You know the purpose of this conversation. Budget aa raha hai in a few days. I want to understand what is budget. I have so many questions. I have many questions, and I'm sure you'll not talk to me as if I'm an educated person. Talk to me like I'm a basic person, if you know what I mean. What is budget? Let's start from there. क्या है? What is this hoopla hype that happens every year? चलता रहता है, क्या है?
So, see, basically, let me give you a very simple example. So let's say someone goes to buy a mobile phone. Okay. And let's say they don't buy it off an Amazon, but they go into a proper physical shop, which is rare these days. So, the moment they walk into the shop, the first thing that the salesman is likely to ask them, or if not ask them, at least try and gauge, कि budget कितना है इनका? So what is the budget? I mean, what is the maximum, or what is the price that you're willing to pay for buying a mobile? So what does budget really mean in this context? It essentially means the expenditure you are willing to make on buying a certain product, which in this case happens to be a mobile phone. Now, so that's the first part of it. So the interesting thing is then you can essentially finance that expenditure either by spending your own money or taking on a loan, or part your own money and part a loan. I mean, you can even take a loan while ordering food on Zomato. I mean, you don't need to pay it off your own hard-earned money. So the loans are available for everything. So basically, there are two sides to any budget. There is the expenditure that you are willing to make and how you will finance that expenditure. So there are two sides. So basically, the government budget is the same, right? Now, as individuals, we can work in a piecemeal basis. We can have a budget for everything that we are likely to spend money on. The government can't. So the government budgets its expenditure for the coming financial year. So the budget that is supposed to be presented by the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman on 1st February will essentially lay down the expenditure the government is expecting to make in the next financial year, which starts from April 1st, 2025 and goes on to March 31st, 2026. So expenditure, and then how will they finance that expenditure? So partly through taxes that we all pay, or rather majorly through taxes that we all pay, and then through borrowing money. So it's what works at an individual level also works at the national level. So this is basically what a government's budget is all about.
Oh. So if I understand it correctly, the government is like a family. I'm just comparing. There is a family like patriarch, who's sitting with their kids and was like, okay, this year we earned this much. Next year, these are our expenses. Okay, we have a wedding coming up, we have a foreign trip coming up, we have education for our kids, etc., etc. This is how much I earn. This is my salary, and this is the rent I get from our ancestral property, whatever. So this is my revenue. This is my expenditure. This is my plan for the year. So budget gives an indication of my revenue, my expenditure, if there is a gap somewhere. So how do I finance that gap? And it also gives me a sense of the priorities of the household, right? So if there's a gap, is what we call fiscal deficit, right? Obviously, you know better. I'm just showing off. So there is a fiscal deficit which the government then figures out what to do about it, and it also shows their priorities. For example, if it's a family, they're like, okay, मेरी घर की priority है education of my kids and not like car. Similarly, for government, it can be like, okay, this year's priority is healthcare and not defense, for example. As a voter or as a taxpayer, you think this is a good way to summarize in the sense ki, okay, this is what my government is going to work toward next year, and this is where my money is being used for?
Yes, I mean, that is by far the best way to look at it. Also, see, what happens is, the word taxpayer is used very loosely these days, right? So a lot of people on social media, essentially, when they say that we are paying taxes, tend to mean income tax, right? But a very small proportion of the country actually pays income tax. But everyone actually pays tax. So as you talked about in the introduction, there are direct taxes and there are indirect taxes. So the direct taxes are like the income tax you and I pay on our income, or the income tax that corporates pay on their profits, right? Companies like Upstox.
We were talking about budget as a representation of national priorities and taxpayers. We were talking about tax, how we feel like income tax सब देते हैं, but बहुत कम लोग actually देते हैं. But we actually, practically, everyone pays taxes in some way or the other.
Right. So, these days, there is a movement happening on the social media where a lot of people who pay income tax like to believe that they are the only ones paying tax, which is really not true. Yes, I mean, a bulk of the income tax is paid by very few people. Actually, if you look at the numbers for 22-23, 87% of the income tax paid by individuals was paid by around 76, 77 lakh people. So that's a very, very minuscule proportion of if you assume that the population of India is around 140 crores, so it's around 0.5%. But then everyone actually pays tax. So let's say we were having this coffee here, right? So the coffee that would have been bought to make this black coffee, there would be an indirect tax that would have been paid on it. Or when you buy something from a shop, so there is GST that all of us pay. So in that sense, everyone actually pays tax. Now, of course, there are people out there who do not pay as much tax as they should. I mean, that's also true, but that does not mean that income tax is the only tax that is being paid.
Okay, so let's get into tax just to understand for our audience slightly better. Okay, people, like you said, people keep talking about income tax, etc. So there is a direct tax, which is income tax. There is an indirect tax that we pay, like you said, through GST or like toll tax, road tax, property tax, etc. And then there is a corporation tax, which the big companies pay.
Which any company which makes a profit pays.
Okay, so these are all.
Yeah, so corporation tax is a direct tax, and personal income tax that you and I pay is also a direct tax. When it comes to indirect taxes, there is goods and services tax, which all of us pay. Then there are excise duties, which all of us pay to indirectly because that excise duty is built into the price of a product. So whenever we buy a product, we pay excise duty on it, but indirectly. So these are basically, then there can be import duties and stuff like that. So these are indirect taxes, and then there are direct taxes. So these are largely the two ways through which a government earns, through which the central government earns taxes. But the interesting thing is this, that if you look at the total amount of taxes that the central government collects, it forms a little over half of their expenditure. So, if I were to use the numbers for this financial year, 24-25, the expected government expenditure is supposed to be around 48.2 lakh crores. And I hope I'm remembering it correctly. It's a large number. And the taxes that the government hopes to earn is around 25.8 lakh crore. So it's a little over half of what the expenditure is supposed to be. So, but then there are other ways. There are non-tax ways also through which the government earns money. Right. So one way is when the government. So a lot of companies in India are owned by the government. Okay. So like the company my father used to work for, Coal India Limited, is owned by the government. Now, a few years back, Coal India came up with what is known as an initial public offer, an IPO. So they sold a part of their stake, right? So basically, the government sold shares there. I think it was some 10% or some number like that of their shares in Coal India to the stock market, right? So the money that came through that is also an earning for the government. Okay? So similarly, the Life Insurance Corporation of India, LIC of India, had an IPO a few years back. So through that, the government earned money. So this is one way. Then these companies make profits. All these government-owned companies. You have so many banks: State Bank of India, Central Bank, Punjab National Bank, Bank of Baroda. So all these banks make profits. All the government-owned companies make profits. So you have, petrol pumps owned by, not directly by the government, but companies like, you have Indian Oil Corporation, you have Bharat Petroleum. So all these companies make money and they pay dividends to the government. So that is another source of earning for the government every year. Then there is the Reserve Bank of India. Okay, so the Reserve Bank of India, during its operations, also ends up making a reasonable amount of money, and that also goes to the government. So these are the non-tax ways of earning money, and this is around, so for of 48 lakh crore, around 25.8, 26 is through taxes, and this is, I think, around 5 lakh crore. So 26 plus 5 comes to 31, and the remaining amount is essentially borrowed by the government. So around a third or a little over a third of its expenditure, the government borrows. So, like, a lot of us, so here's, the difference between a household budget and a government budget, right? So in case of a household, what is likely to happen is that not every household would borrow to finance its expenditure, at least not regularly, because that is a recipe for disaster. So unless you are borrowing to buy a house, but if you're borrowing to meet your regular expenditure, right? If you're like spending, let's say you earn 50,000 rupees a month and your spending is 75,000. And if you're filling up the gap through, or if you're financing the gap through spending on credit cards, so 25,000 rupees every month, sooner or later, you will end up in trouble. Because, so typically what happens is, when a youngster discovers a credit card, they think it's free money. And, I can talk from my personal experience here. So when I was doing my MBA, I don't know whether it's still the case, but in the early 2000s, if you went to a good MBA institute, a foreign bank normally came calling and they gave you a free credit card. Okay. So I got a free credit card from Citibank. And after a while, I just thought that this is the first time I'm saying this on camera, though I've written about it a few times. I thought, let me just spend the money and then I'll default and I'll disappear. Because, how is Citibank going to locate me? India is a huge country. And I did that. I spent the money and I bought a lot of books, saw a lot of movies, and I defaulted. But then Citibank came calling, and they came calling through a lawyer. And the lawyer called up my father, which was very, very embarrassing. And then he had to settle the debt. So, so the point is that as an individual or as a household, you cannot perpetually keep financing your expenditure through borrowing. but a government can do that. So that is a very, very, it's a distinction between a household budget and a government's budget.
Got it. First of all, thank you for reminding that I have to pay my credit card bill. It was, I think, last takeaway. And just got a missed call again, sir, from some bank. I can't name them, but they are very particular with follow-ups. Anyway, back to topic. Okay,
So,
sir.
so now that we're talking about credit cards, so do you have an account with the same bank?
Yes.
So do you know that they can debit that money from your bank? So it always makes sense to have a credit card with a bank in which you do not have a zone.
Noted. Next credit card. I'm coming. All the 97 banks I don't have an account with, please reach out. Please stop messaging saying personal loan worth 2 lakh. Just give credit card. Thanks. I'm just showing my face so they know my credit score is very high. Thanks. Good person. I wear formal shirts, which means I have money. Sorry, sir. Back to the topic. I was saying, so now we have understood the government earns money through taxes, both direct and indirect, through profits made from PSUs and what you call disinvestment, where they sort of sell shares of this thing. And you also said that the fundamental difference between a family and a government is that a family cannot keep borrowing money till eternity, while sort of the government can. If the government changes,
They do not sort of. They can keep telling, right? This shows us this choice. So I think, see, you know what? This might get slightly technical, but pardon me here. Some things cannot be explained in the most simplest way. See, there are three things at a very broad level which make a government a government. Okay. The first is right to legal violence. A government can wage a war. You and I can't. The right to taxation and the right to print money. So I think this second and third reason are, three things of the three things are important here. So the reason that a government can keep borrowing for perpetuity is because they have the right to tax the citizens and they have the right to print money. So worst come worse, a government can always print money and repay its debt. Now, obviously, that can create more other problems, but prima facie, this is possible. So, which is why a government is different from a household. Also, sorry, I mean, one point before we move on. See, it's again, while we finance the government through our taxes, we also help the government in borrowing. A lot of people don't realize that. So basically, how does the government borrow? The government borrows by selling bonds. They sell something known as bonds, which are basically financial securities which pay interest. So who buys these bonds? First, the banks buy these bonds. Why do banks buy these bonds? Banks buy these bonds because it is mandatory for them. The law of the land demands that a certain proportion of the deposits they have be invested in these bonds. This is one part. The other thing is, and when you buy an LIC policy, like most of us are forced to do when we sort of take on our first jobs, because that's what our fathers used to buy. So when your fathers force you and to buy an LIC policy, that money is also typically invested in government bonds. So this is how you finance the government again. Then there is a third avenue. I'm not sure how it works at Upstox, but if you work for an organization, so typically every month you pay some amount of money to what is known as the Employees Provident Fund. So when you pay money to the Employees Provident Fund, a lot of it is 85% of it, probably more, gets invested into government bonds. So it is again, it's like you and I finance the government through our taxes. You and I also finance the government by helping them borrow. And then finally, there is something known as the Public Provident Fund, which a lot of us investing to save tax. So that money also lands up with the government. So all these things essentially, so it's basically, we finance the government through taxes, and we also finance the government by helping it borrow. So it's both sides.
Two questions have come from what you said, sir. And these are questions that I often encounter on social media. Everybody keeps asking these questions to each other. And I want your answer now. Okay, first question is, people, especially when people go to places like Dubai or UAE, they come back and they are like, यार पता है वहाँ तो टैक्स ही नहीं देते हैं यार, यार भाई हमारे देश में क्यों नहीं है ऐसा यार, भाई मैं क्यों दे रहा हूँ यार, things like that. Do you think it's practical to have a system where there is no income tax in India?
In fact, see, this is again, lazy reasoning. How big is Dubai? Right? How big is Dubai? Not very big. If you look at the UAE, well, Dubai, I think, has run out of oil, but there are other parts of UAE which have access to oil. Okay. So because of that money coming in, the government actually ends up making a lot of money. They don't need income tax to finance their expenditure. India is not like that. So income tax is a very important part of the government's budget. So for anyone who has this crazy idea that one fine day income tax is going to go away, that is not going to happen. So people, I come across this reasoning that, okay, we'll cut income tax and then everyone who saves money will go out and spend it. So because they will spend it, the economy will boom and this and that will happen, which is fine. I mean, as far as lazy reasoning goes, this is very good. But the point is, income tax is of the 25 lakh crore, that 26 lakh crore that the government hopes to earn through taxes this year. Yes. Income tax is a substantial amount of that. Now, if that amount goes away suddenly, how is the government supposed to finance it, right? So how will it finance it? One is it can cut down on expenditure. But if it cuts down on expenditure, then there are going to be so many repercussions, so many programs will have to stop, maybe salaries will go unpaid, so on and so forth. The second part is, okay, it may not cut down on its expenditure, but then it will have to borrow more. Okay. So how will it borrow more? It will borrow more by selling bonds, and then you and I will finance it in various ways. Now, what needs to be understood here that at any point of time, there is an X amount of money which can be borrowed. So if the government borrows more, there is lesser money for everyone else to borrow. So what will happen in that scenario? Interest rates will go up. So everyone who does not pay income tax, or even people who so everyone who pays income tax and everyone who does not pay income tax, their EMIs will shoot up. So see, all this lazy reasoning is possible that income tax should be zero because it is zero in Dubai. And then they'll say that a lot of people are moving to Dubai to save tax, which is true. A lot of people are moving to Dubai to save tax. But does that mean that the government of India should also not charge income tax? No, it does not. So the next question is but then, we do not get enough facilities against land tax, which is also true. But then these are two distinct issues. I mean, just because, you do not get any facilities against the income tax that you pay, that does not imply that the government will stop, taking income tax. So these are two distinct issues. So it's a complex issue, which essentially, when for a human mind, which does not like complexity, so we come up with rationalizations like, okay, Dubai mein income tax nahi hai, or but then this is how we do it.
So again, if I have to summarize, दुनिया में कुछ ऐसे देश हैं जैसे दुबई, Monaco, countries which are way small. I mean, there's no comparison. Plus, they have some source of revenue for the government. Like Monaco has casinos and tourism. Dubai, like you said, UAE has oil, etc., which is important. UAE is in, and which is not practical in India, is what you're saying. Perfect, got it. Which brings me to the second.
But one more point. Also, see, then there is. So there is also this talk about how income tax rates are high. Okay, and that is also true. I mean, if you look at the fact that beyond 30%, I mean, there are surcharges, and the highest tax, the marginal rate can go up to as high as 40% if you're making, like, let's say, more than a crore. So tax rates are also on the highest side. Now, it's important to understand why personal income tax rates have gone up. And the major reason for that is that in 2019, the corporate income tax rates were cut in the hope that the corporates would invest and spend more money, and that would lead to economic growth, right? Or increase in economic activity and then economic growth. But that has not happened. But the government expenditure, meanwhile, due to the pandemic and everything else, has gone up. So how do you finance that difference, right? So you essentially, because of that, the personal income tax rates are up. So the point is that, at a superficial level, it might, it's easy to sort of reason and rationalize things, but there are always these unseen effects which people do not understand. So income tax rates are high because corporate tax rates were cut in 2019.
So we talked about the ways the government makes money, and you also touched upon the ways where government spends money. So far, what I've understood is they spend on, of course, salaries of government employees, which is a major expense, subsidies, and then you said all the infrastructure projects, every government investment in healthcare, education, defense, etc. But then you also touched upon personal tax, etc., which brings me to my next question, which is one class that constantly, and I've been part of that class for many years. So my next question is on behalf of a large section of our society, which I used to belong to for many years, जो कि हर बजट के बाद ये कंप्लेन करती है कि यार बजट आते जाते रहेंगे और हमारा सबसे बुरा हाल चल रहा है, which is the salaried class. Okay, we keep hearing I mean, I have friends now from both classes, salaried class and freelancers and entrepreneurs and all of the whole mixed bag. उसमें सैलरी क्लास इज दी ओनली वन भी बजट में कुछ भी हो दे कम टू मी इन लाइक भाई हमारा तो वही क्या है कोई चारे डालेंगे और पीपीएफ में डालेंगे ये होगा कुछ नहीं हो सकता तो ये लोग का सही है ये रेंट बिजनेस लंच डाल देते हैं फ्लाइट एक्सपेंस डाल देते हैं इज इट फेयर टू से इज इट अ फेयर असेसमेंट टू से दैट सैलरी क्लास gets more affected by budget? Is it?
I mean, in the sense that not by the budget, but by the very fact that it is by far the easiest for the government to tax the salaried class. So it's easy for them to earn income tax of them because it's all officially accounted, and the companies cut tax on behalf of the government and hand it over to the government. So which is why the salaried class has this sort of grouse that कि भाई हमारा तो कोई सुनता नहीं और हम लोग बहुत टैक्स देते हैं and this and that. Also, what tends to happen is people who have business income can set off their expenses against their income while paying tax. Now, a lot of times whether that expense is a business expense or not is questionable, right? So and a lot of people do that. So which is why it is sort of I think the grouse is real, and the fact that they get impacted is also real. But I mean, there's nothing really that can be done here because for the government it's the easiest for them to tax salaried employees. So that grouse will only continue. Also, the interesting part here is that all salaried income gets taxed at the marginal rate. So which basically means that if you're earning a certain amount of money, you will get taxed at 30%. But that is not true about a lot of non-salaried income. So if, let's say you make money from the stock market. So for many years, there was no tax on long-term capital gains. So which basically means that if you invested in a stock and held it for more than a year and then sold it, so the profit that you made, you had to pay no tax on it. The same was true about equity mutual funds. For many years, when you bought a property like a house, and when you were selling it, you could take inflation into account while paying taxes on it. But the salaried class had no such avenue. And the same was true about the interest earned on fixed deposits. I mean, you paid tax at the marginal rate. So to that extent, I have often said this in my columns over the years that the Indian tax system was built and is still built to some extent for the non-salaried rich. Okay. So that is now being unwound gradually. And I think in a few years' time, it will be a much more fairer tax system. We are getting there, but we are still not there.
Non-salary rich. That's my target. Those three words. Those three.
So if you were to make a comedy special out of it, I need some copyright.
My next special will be called non-salaried rich. I have figured. Very unrelatable content for a lot of people, but my focus now is non-salaried rich people. Okay, so the grouch, like the rant that a lot of my salaried class people give, will please just tell me how fair is this rant? They say we earn some money. We work so much throughout the month. कंपनी भी काट के देती है पैसा मुझे उसमें से क्या पीपीएफ बेचारे ये वो जा रहा है आधी बातें तो मुझे समझ में नहीं आती है ठीक है आई कम बैक होम नाउ आई हैव सम मनी से 100 रुपीज आई फील लाइक मैं इन्वेस्ट करूँ या कार खरीदूँ चलो मैं कार खरीदता हूँ सो आई गो टू बाई अ कार अगेन आई पे GST I pay road tax, all sorts of different taxes. I come back, bring it on the road. I go for petrol. Again, I pay for petrol, diesel, whatever. Again, pay some indirect tax there. ठीक है, मैं कार नहीं खरीदूंगा, मैं पैसे डाल देता हूँ. I'll invest somewhere. इन्वेस्ट करो, वहां से जो पैसा आ रहा है उसमें भी टैक्स. सो इट्स लाइक व्हाट इज, मैं क्यों, सो दे स्टार्ट रेंटिंग सिंग, मैं क्यों कर रहा हूँ यार ये सब.
See, basically, when you earn money, you have to pay tax. Acha, also, one needs to make a slight distinction here, and again, I'll get slightly technical. See, when you buy a car, okay, so a part of the GST there it goes to the central government. A part of the GST goes to the state government. State governments also have expenditures. They also have programs running, so they need their share of tax. So when you sort of take that car and drive it out and then buy petrol, so when you pay for petrol, so there is excise duty built into the price, which goes to the central government, and then there is a sales tax or value-added tax, which goes to the state government. So different governments are taxing you. So that is one distinction that needs to be made here. Uh, Now, the salaried class, as I said, is sort of entitled to feel their grouse because at the end of the day, they don't see any ROI or return on investment, if I were to say, on the taxes that they pay. But again, as I said, it is by far the easiest for the government to tax the salaried class, and which is why it will continue taxing the salaried class. And given the fact that the total amount of taxpayers, right, I mean, is very, very small. So if I were to sort of, throw an offhand figure at you, around 2 to 3 crore people pay income tax, or at least paid income tax for the income earned in the financial year 22-23, which is the latest data available. So it is very easy for the government to tax those people. Also, when you go out to consume anything, again, it is easy for the government to tax you at that point. So wherever it is easy for the government to tax you, the government will tax you because the government needs money to sort of, run the country. So that is how it is. Now, you feel cheated, you do not feel good about it. There's nothing really that can be done. So that is how it is actually. That's the, the long and the short of it.
This is how it is.
So that's the best way to rationalize it. So basically, see, I don't think it's, so people who are spending their mental energy on this, they will be better off in trying to figure out as to how to make more money rather than, try figuring out, or rather, getting into the self-pity mode where, I'm paying this much tax and nothing is happening. And it's basically, you're wasting your mental and physical energies.
How to make more money? I'll talk to you after this episode because I'm very curious. But इससे मुझे, I got reminded of a question that has been asked since eternity to every economist ever, from Keynes to Kaul. There's an alliteration.
I pretend to be an economist. I'm an MBA. I have never studied economics.
There was a flow to that. So the question is, why doesn't government just print money and give it to everyone? India will be the richest country in the world. Print, give 1 lakh to everyone.
So see, what happens is, so this is, as a kid, I used to always wonder as to why doesn't the government print money? And one day, for those who grew up during the era when Doordarshan used to be the only television channel, so Doordarshan had this morning slot. Okay, so for Gen Z people, television wasn't 24/7 always. There was a time when television was available, or rather broadcast only for a certain period of time. So in the morning, there used to be this anchor called Deepak Vora, who, if I remember correctly, also used to be an Indian Foreign Service officer, and he was doing this on the side. And he, in one of his programs, tried asking someone this question. And that guy gave, it was basically a, verbal barrage, which nobody really understood as to what he was trying to say, which typically tends to happen with a lot of economists when they have to talk to the general janta. So basically what I wanted to say was that this is a question that has bothered me for a very long period of time, and at a certain point of time, I figured out the answer to it. So let me sort of explain this to an example, okay? Now, so this is a 40-storied building, and so we were to go on to the roof of the building. And a helicopter comes by, and that helicopter throws a lot of money. Okay? And we are just standing below the helicopter and we get hold of that money. So, what is it that we are likely to do with that money?
पागल हो जाऊंगा सर.
And we'll go out and basically spend it. Now, imagine this were to happen at a national level. That money, printed money, is dropped from helicopters all across India or in any other country for that matter. What will happen? People will just go to the stores, go to the malls, go to the restaurants, and want to spend that money. What will happen? So basically, you have all this new money coming in. So the supply of money has gone up. So the demand for goods and services will go through the roof. But the supply of goods and services will not go up immediately. So how will the adjustment happen? The prices will go through the roof. So the reason the government cannot print money and throw it from helicopters all across the country is because it will eventually lead to very, very high inflation, or rate of price rise will go through the roof. So it will end up creating an economic disaster. And if you look at the history of money, this is something that has happened over and over again. So it happened in 1923 in Germany, where prices just went through the roof. It has happened in Argentina over and over again. In fact, a brilliant story that a friend of mine told me from Argentina about Argentina once was that inflation was so high that when people would go to eat in a restaurant, they would pay at before eating the meal, because by the time they finished eating the meal, the prices could have gone up. So it was, and that was happening because the government was printing money left, right, and center. So this happened in the post-COVID also, where in the US and other parts of the developed world, the government printed money and it sort of not directly but indirectly distributed it to people, and because of that, inflation went up in the US and in parts of Europe. Now, this inflation was not very, very high, but it was much higher than the kind of inflation those countries had seen in the past. So, which is why the governments like tax people in order to spend money, and they don't. I mean, they don't. They do print money, but not like where we sort of tend to assume that the government should not take taxes from us and print money and finance its
Is
expenditure.
this what hyperinflation is?
So hyperinflation is basically very, very high inflation. So it's one of the definitions of the term is when inflation crosses 10% per month. We are in a hyperinflationary scenario. So that kind of thing rarely happens. But even an inflation of 7% a year, it hurts people. So it's in a way it's an unseen tax, because your power to spend on things comes down. Your purchasing power comes down.
So from again, just to summarize, the reason a government can't just print money and distribute is because you'll have a lot of money in the system, but the goods and services will remain the same.
Or at least not go up immediately.
Proportionately at least. तो हम बाहर जाएंगे तो वड़ा पाव will be 1 lakh rupees, for example.
Never had.
हो सकता है एक दिन तो. Because you remember what happened in Zimbabwe, in Venezuela, and all that. With even the currency notes had to be like 1 million kai.
So it's happened in Germany, it's happened in Zimbabwe, Argentina, Brazil, Hungary, so different parts of the world.
So that is the answer for all my friends. So keep asking कि ऐसे छाप के बांट दो ना यार लोगों को, इतना क्या. Every day there's a conversation around this scheme, that scheme, direct benefit, trickle down economics. पैसे बांट दो.
एक और चीज है ना इसमें कि अगर इतना ही आसान होता ना, तो just because every average Joe in the country has figured this out कि पैसे छाप के बांट दो, तो सरकार ने भी figure out कर लिया होता ना.
Correct. Okay, so now we've discussed lots of different aspects of budget. I want to ask from a very common man, common woman, common person's perspective कि उनकी life budget से कैसे change होती है. The reason I'm asking is through the course of this week, especially on first and through some days after that, every channel will show us a lot of graphs, lot of numbers, charts, etc., etc. But मैं एक नॉर्मल, मैं या ऑटो चलाता हूँ या फिर मैं टीचर हूँ या एक नॉर्मल सैलरी क्लास लाइक वी डिस्कस, जस्ट अ नॉर्मल पर्सन, हाउ व्हाट शुड आई लुक फॉर व्हेन द बजट कम्स, practical ways in which the budget affects our life.
Okay, see, if you are if you're an income taxpayer, you obviously need to be aware of what are the prevailing income tax rates. Or if the government has introduced a new way of investing and saving tax. In my personal experience, a lot of people are not aware of every such possibility. Also, I think, on a more general note, uh, a lot of people who start working, one of the first things, and I'm sort of deviating here from the budget, is one of the first things they need to know is to go through their salary slip and exactly understand what is what. Because typically, and especially when it comes to saving tax, a lot of youngsters, and well, not just youngsters, wake up in the last week of March or in March, and then they are like struggling, itna tax cut jayega, and what should I do? And some of them end up calling up their fathers, and or they are, they go to a bank, and then the relationship manager at the bank cons them. So you need to be aware. So once that basic awareness is there, now you will know exactly what to look for in the budget. So this is essentially one part of it. I think the second thing that happens is that in every budget, indirect taxes on products sort of go up and down. And this is, I think, where the media comes in, where the media does a very good job of highlighting these changes. So this is one part. The third part is like, what exactly is the government looking to spend money on? And if some of that money is being spent in a program which is essentially in the region or in the city that you live in. Okay, so that is one part. So these are the direct things that you can look at. The indirect part is where it gets sort of interesting. Not the indirect part, the unseen part as such. See, again, I mean, we've talked about this, but I'd sort of like to highlight it again. See, again, this year there's a lot of talk about how the government needs to cut income tax rates and all that, right? So the idea again is that once the government cuts income tax rates, people will earn more, so people will spend more money. People spend more money, it sort of filters down into higher economic growth. So that is one part of the argument, and which is what that's the part of the argument that all social media warriors understand. What they don't understand is that, okay, the government might cut income tax rates, but then where are they going to get that difference from, right? So if, let's say, the government corrects 10 lakh crore through income tax, and now after the cut is expected to collect 8 lakh crore. So where will it get that difference of 2 lakh crore from? It's bound to come from somewhere, right? So the point is that there is no free lunch, right? So if there is a cut somewhere, there will, the government will find other ways of making up for that money. And one way could be by borrowing more. And as I said, when the government borrows more, and then the interest rates can go up. So you may end up paying a higher EMI, even though your income tax rates are down. So there is always a trade-off, and people do not understand this trade-off. So give you a very simple example. When we were in school, we were taught coordinate geometry. So y is equal to mx plus c isn't. That's the only coordinate geometry that I remember. So if you knew the value of m, x, and c, you knew the value of y, right? But the macroeconomy does not work like that. There are seen effects which are very obvious, and if you are the kind who just understands scene effects, you have a great career ahead as a social media warrior, and people will follow you and people will listen to you. But you will be wrong on most days. So see, this is how one should look at the budget.
Okay. So what I'm understanding is that the government needs certain corpus to run the country. So अगर income tax से वो कम कर भी रहे, they will need that extra money.
They'll get it from somewhere else, and it's just that you may not even be able to understand where that money is coming from.
Yeah, because you see, like you said, you're the scene person. तो आपने देखा कि मेरा tax तो कम हो गया, मैं sort of, you're not realizing जो बाकी जगह
So see, one thing they can do is, again, an offhand example. So they can ask the public sector units to pay a higher dividend. Right now, to pay a higher dividend, the public sector units may increase the price of the product that they are selling. So everyone won't be impacted, but someone will be impacted. But that someone may not know that they are being impacted. So that is how it works.
I don't know if this is a how relevant this question is, but while you were saying that the government makes announcements, etc., is like again in corporate life when you make announcement, I'm going to launch this product this year, and I'm going to have this app running by July, etc., etc. There is a feedback mechanism. There's a review system in place. Your boss will come, etc., etc. You will not get appraisal, etc. Now, even governments have a very obvious feedback system, which is the next election, right? But are there checks and balances in place saying you announced all of this, but you didn't do this? Or you said this much money will go in defense, this much in healthcare, education. Do we have a system where there are checks and balances?
So basically, every month there is a body known as the Controller General of Expenditure, CGA, not CAG. Okay, so they release government expenditure data. They release government tax data. So anyone who's interested in following up can follow it.
I mean, this is publicly.
This is publicly.
Any
You can just go to their website and click on that month's data and look at all the data.
now, as a quizzer and as a history enthusiast, I just want to look at the history of budgets in India, just because it's my personal interest areas. Now, since I started growing up, we started hearing of the great Manmohan Singh budget from early 90s. And then we had the dream budget of Chittambaram. And then we have had so many budgets after that. We had Yashwant Sinha, just for sake. We had now Nirmala Sitharaman. And we have had, before I was born, there was Morarji Desai. And we've had many finance ministers, many budgets which have sort of defined how this country's economy was. Do you have a favorite budget which you go back to saying this was one highlight that?
No, not really. So I don't look at budgets like that. And I'll tell you why. See, basically what happens is that a lot of announcements, like let's take 1991, the budget speech of 1991 by Manmohan Singh. Now, so there was obviously, the budget that the government and the finance minister were presenting. And there were a lot of economic reforms announced at that point. So it wasn't, those reforms were not a part of the budget. It was just an opportune moment to announce those reforms. So a lot of the budget speech, which is peppered with, we did this, we plan to do this, is not directly a part of the budget. So any budget in which the government does not increase taxes, or any budget in which the government does not sort of increase its expenditure in a major way, I think is a good budget. That is the way I look at it. I don't get emotionally
invested. So do you have a wish list?
As I just said, any budget in which the taxes really do not go up majorly or the expenditure does not go up majorly, to me is a good budget. Having said that, there is one point that I have made over the years, and I think this is also a right time to reiterate it. I think I look forward to a day where different forms of income, salaried income, interest income, income from property, income from investing in stocks, mutual funds, so on and so forth, are all taxed at the same rate. Now, previously, when I have said this, I have not been very popular with people because people like the idea of not paying the same amount of tax on the capital gains they make on investing in stocks vis-a-vis the tax they pay on their salaries. So, but my logic is that, and if we cannot have the same rate of tax, at least the definition of the long-term capital gains on investing in stocks needs to change. Because currently, if you just invest for 1 year, you get a long-term capital gains benefit. I think 1 year is too short a time to categorize anything as long-term. And it, in a way, sort of incentivizes people to sell also very, very quickly. Whereas the entire stock market game, if I may call it so, and people who end up making money essentially do that by staying invested for a very long period of time. So I think, so this is one thing I hope which happens in the days and years to come. Though I'm not very optimistic about it.
I have a doubt which might be completely unrelated, but while we were talking about how people don't understand even their salary slips sometimes, or how they are paying taxes, what the budget is. Although we were in school, we had a chapter on taxation, just one chapter, I think in 10th, 11th. But do you think, and that right now, as we speak, 2025, is there a need for a better financial literacy, like the basics for
100%.
school, colleges, etc.? So we at least understand some of these things.
I mean, I think, see, one thing that we all need to be able to understand is, how to calculate compounded annual growth rate, or what used to be called compound interest in school. We are all taught compound interest, but the teachers sort of do not really emphasize on the importance of it. So if all the math that you learn in your school life, if you can just remember the importance of compound interest, that in itself is your financial literacy goes through the roof because of that. So a lot of people get carried away because they can't calculate returns. I'll give you a very simple example. So if you talk to let's say someone in Delhi, and I mean I'm stereotyping here, so pardon me for it. So Delhi people are great believers in buying real estate. Okay, so they'll tell you, "अरे ये हमने 50 लाख में खरीदा था, ये हमने 2 करोड़ में बेचा." So what? So how is in their heads? How are they figuring out the kind of money that they have made by investing in real estate? They're subtracting that one big round number, which is 2 crore, from another big round number, which is 50 lakhs. So the profit is 1.5. Okay, fine. But boss, you also need to take into account the time period you have invested in, because ultimately any return is a function of the time value of money. I mean, how long have you invested? Then the risk of owning real estate, right? If you bought it on a home loan, the interest that you're paying on that home loan, the property tax that you pay on it, the maintenance charges which have gone through the roof these days. So once you start factoring in all these things, you may end up realizing that I might have just been better off just investing in a good equity mutual fund and sitting back and relaxing. And people who invest in under construction properties, right? The risk of the builder disappearing with your money. And all this has happened not just in Delhi, but all across the country. So I think that the lack of understanding of basic math hurts us at so many levels. So financial literacy, you see, financial literacy is this vague, large term which is used, right? I think if in schools or in colleges, we were to just emphasize on the importance of how to calculate the rate of return on anything, which is basically compound interest in its various forms, that in itself would be a huge step. But for that, first you have to train the teachers, right? So that is where it starts.
I think that's a wonderful note to end this conversation, Vivek. Because I want to tell our audience that often when I talk to my friends, the moment the topic comes to anything like finance or wealth or budget or economics, you see this resistance from everyone saying, "Yeah, नहीं यार, मुझे नहीं समझ आता यार." Every time you talk about, "Oh, what are you doing with your wealth?" I don't know, कहीं तो कुछ तो mutual fund, SIP, something. It just is a topic that has become such a monster that all of us feel कि नहीं यार, ये रहने दो, my wealth guy will see or my CA will talk about it. And I personally feel that there is a need to simplify all of these into ways where we can all understand these monsters. And I think in today's conversation with Vivek, I tried and learned some of these things for myself. And I hope that you guys also, while watching, learned some of these things for yourself. Because I think we started with budget. What is budget? What does budget mean for us? How does the government earn money? How does it spend money? We even touched upon some of the questions that we keep encountering every day. For example, is the salaried class really affected with budgets every day? Can we print more money and just distribute it to people? Can India have no income tax and bunch of other things? We talked about hyperinflation. We talked about financial literacy. We talked about how a government functions. We talked about our ways and means to understand finance better. Vivek, I am grateful that you took out time for me and for all of us indirectly. I was direct taxpayer for this conversation, and you were all indirect taxpayers. Beautifully done. What a guy. MBA batch of 2013. Vijay, Tina, MBA batch of 2013, ex-brand manager. Thank you.
Investment in securities market are subject to market risks. Read all the related documents carefully before investing.